I think I've shared often with many of you how, as a priest, I absolutely love hearing confessions. What a magnificent event it is when God's mercy bursts forth to touch a heart and a soul, to cleanse someone from sin and to remove sometimes that guilt or shame that has been present in that life, or sometimes for a very long time. And I especially love hearing confessions of our children, first confessions, and when we hear them in the school, they come in so innocent and nervous. They almost always confess how they have disobeyed their parents, or they've fought with their brother or sister. And I always marvel at this, because it so keenly looks to this first and most fundamental reality in all of our lives, the reality of family. And how in the family, you and I are meant to first learn and to live this reality of God's love. Today is this feast of the Holy Family, and we are called to reflect upon the family in which Jesus lived, and to see how our families are meant to be modeled after that holy family. Look at the insights given to us in our readings today. The first reading is from the book of Sirach. That book is from what the Old Testament is called wisdom literature. It was written probably around 200 years before Christ. And so, as that title of wisdom implies, the book gives us practical advice how we are to live so that we might be happy. This part of the book focuses on how God has established family life and what is his plan for it. We hear that he sets a father in honor over his children, and a mother's authority he confirms over her sons. And it speaks to a basic truth that sadly has been lost by so many in our culture today. That family life is not some secular institution that can be changed according to popular whim or thought. It is a divine institution, and it has been established by God with a particular order for our good. We hear that parents have this special and exalted position in the family, one of honor and authority, that children owe their parents special respect and obedience. Again, this is not some old-fashioned proposition that's no longer applicable. It is the timeless wisdom of God. Of course, this authority in family life is never meant to be abused, to express with anger or selfish control, but it's an authority modeled after the authority of God himself, one that expresses itself always in love. This is the emphasis of our second reading from St. Paul's letter to the Colossians, that all of us, in whatever role we have in our families and our communities, are to act with heartfelt compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, that it is love and love alone that is the bond of perfection. The end of that second reading then concludes with that intended dynamic in the relationship of husband and wife. And when we hear this passage again in our modern times, we are tempted to recoil against it. But the problem is not in the truth that the text conveys. I think it is in our misinterpretation of it. First and foremost, St. Paul is expressing an absolute equality between husband and wife. Remember, in his time, women had no legal status, so St. Paul's instruction would have been seen as revolutionary, that he's demanding an equality and a mutuality in the love and respect that they share. But in that total equality, there is meant to be a different expression of that same love. The wife with a deference to her husband, the husband with a servant love that is always warm and generous. And then we see how the order is lived out in our gospel. We see the Holy Family, and we can reflect this certainly in that hierarchy of importance in God's plan. There is no one greater than Mary. She's the only one preserved from original sin. She's the only one through whom the Son of God is born to us. the only one who's assumed body and soul into heaven. So she's the perfect model for all of us. But the angel, when he appears to that family, appears not to Mary, but to Joseph. Rise and take the child and flee to Egypt. Because as the husband and the father, he has that role and responsibility. And so God sends that message to him. Again, sadly, there are so many voices in our society that repudiate this basic truth and plan of God. They, in effect, repudiate the existence of God and his order meant for married life and married love. And sadly, our children are growing up in an age so confused and conflicted, and so many of our families are broken. And so we pray earnestly this day for a restoration of God's will and his plan for all of us and for our families. May his wisdom and truth inform us that all of our loves may be ordered to our love for him, and to be chaste and holy. May we honor that unchanging and unchangeable truth that marriage is and can only be a communion of love between a man and a woman, in that complementarity that brings about the child destined to be a child of God one day in the eternal glory of heaven. And then the very wisdom of God, and not the idiocy of our age, will be what dwells in our hearts and minds. And we will have that attitude of St. Paul, being thankful for everything, singing psalms with gratitude in our hearts, living like the Holy Family that shows us what our families are meant to be, places of great faith and hope and love.